Okay, I'm aware that this one might be a controversial video. This is one that I have thought about making for a while. I've wanted to make it for ages. I'm going to have to be very careful with the way I talk about this. So this video is about the Cambridge children, not about them, in a personal sense. I want to make that really clear. I don't think it's right that they are mascots, that they're being basically against their will. They're born into this kind of contractual relationship with the media. Their parents are kind of hostages and they're made to perform. I'm going to get into that in the video. This is not about them as children. I'm sure they are nice children that are going through a lot of stress, and children are innocent, and nothing against those little kids. The institution they're part of is horrible to other people and to them, I believe, but nothing against those kids, so please have no worries about that. I have come out with this opinion before with people and they've looked at me like I'm crazy, and I really stand by it, which is why I'm making this video. And my argument is, aside from being an anti-monarchist because I'm pro-democracy and I don't believe in imperialism and colonialism and hereditary birthright, I believe the system is abusive, and I believe it abuses the children within the system. So this is partly why I take such an interest in the royal family, because I have an interest, as you know, in abusive family dynamics and oppressive dynamics, PR, and all this stuff kind of comes together with the royals. So recently there's been a big push to put the 3 Cambridge children in the papers, right? They've been on the front of some papers. They've really been kind of like wheeling them out before the coronation. I believe, and I'm putting this out there, this might be a long video, I'm going to be really careful with what I say. I believe that those children are in an abusive system, and that anyone with an ounce of humanity, and I truly mean this, would want them out of that system, or at least keep them out of it until they're old enough to opt in. I'm obviously very, very anti-monarchy. I don't think there should be a monarchy, and I believe that we should vote on that as people. But if people still want a monarchy, okay, let's vote. It's not what I want, maybe other people want it. But I think that the children being a part of it before they're able to choose, being forced into it as these mascots from birth, is abusive. I'm not saying, as well, I need to say this at the start, I'm not saying they're being abused by their family or their parents. I don't know the situation. I think there's something to be said about not protecting your children from this abuse, but I understand it's complicated, so I'm not accusing anybody in that way, because I know this is going to be controversial anyway, but I'm going to say it. But I want to be really, really clear about that. I think what we might be witnessing is, obviously William went through a lot of abuse with the media system when he was growing up, and sometimes in dynamics like that, people, they think it's normal to go through those things. Sometimes you'll get a person like Harry who will go through the system, realise they've been hurt by it and want to change it, and they'll often be made the black sheep or the scapegoat, or they'll be villainised or smeared. And you'll also get people who go through the system and are abused and are indoctrinated through it, and they come out of it. Often you see this in abusive families where they'll say, I was fine, my childhood was fine, nothing bad happened to me, stop complaining. But then they go on to do the same behaviours with their own children and basically traumatise and abuse their own children, and they don't recognise that something's wrong because it's too painful for them in a lot of ways to understand or think about the ways in which they suffered in their own childhood. That's the difficulty when you're talking about generational abuse, because it's not always as simple as people think it is, with an abusive parent or caregiver being evil in their own minds. I'm not saying what they do is fine, but sometimes if it's a repeated pattern, it can be so difficult. It can be so incredibly difficult to, get past that. If people are emotionally strong and mature, and I really stand by this, you're able to look back at your own childhood, what was good for you, what wasn't, what you want to change. If you have children, if you decide to have children, that's really healthy. And I honestly believe people who have had a more difficult time are sometimes the ones who are more unable to maybe go through that stuff because it's so painful. And everything, to understand that you were allowed to be abused for a certain period of time by people that were meant to protect you is horrible and traumatizing and scary. And I can understand the generational pattern, especially in the royal family, because this was foisted upon them all at birth. They did not choose this. That's why I try and show empathy for even the ones that are doing bad things, because they did not choose this relationship. And I've got videos coming about Charles's childhood based on his biography by Jonathan Dimbleby. I was watching a documentary about Andrew last night called The Problem Prince, and I honestly feel like this can all be traced back, a great deal of it, to the abusive system, which harms everybody in it. And if you watch The Crown, for example, the actual story of that show, and I'm not saying the Crown's always brilliant with how it presents things, but the actual story of that show is how This is a family with generational trauma that are struggling in their relationships and all feel very isolated and empty and kind of subservient, but they've got this huge wealth as well. They're kind of performing for people, and it's breaking apart their family relationships, right? Their whole life is a performance, and people go different ways because of the trauma of that weird situation they're all in. And it's that's why it's not shocking to me, you know, if you look back at history and you look back at a lot of our kings and queens, and people will think, oh god, some of them were really awful, weren't they? And it's like, yeah, they were, but why do you think that was? You know, what was it, do you think, about being born into the role you didn't choose, also having like extreme power surrounded by psychopathic people, making you quite delusional about your power and your role and that you're above people? Like, what is that? What about that do we think might have caused some not the best monarchs, right? Anyway, right, let's get to this, because on the front of the papers recently, I've seen a lot of the Cambridge children. So I went through some of these, and I've basically made some annotations, and I think we should go through it. This might be a long one because it's something that you can't just cover in passing. It's too important. Again, just before we begin, I've said this from the start, George is being abused by that system. The system is abusive, and I don't care what anyone says, the child is being abused. I'm not saying he's being abused by his family, I'm saying the system is abusive, and that child is not free. We wouldn't accept it for our own children. We mustn't accept it for him. It doesn't matter if he's born into material wealth and privilege. If we care about mental health and we care about children, and these are the things we teach in our normal lives, it shouldn't make a difference that this little boy just so happened to be born into that role, because I can't imagine what that's doing to him. Okay, so I've got Bella magazine here, and there's a really, really big picture of George. He's only 9 years old, but Prince George is showing a maturity beyond his years, our future king. So just that in itself sends an absolute shiver down my spine, because essentially people say, oh, you know, he can choose if he wants to be king or not, but he's been given his role, right? There's ownership in it. Our future king. We have claimed him. This child is not even 10, and we've claimed him and his future. Now, it's an alarm bell for me, and I think we know this in other situations. I'm going to be careful what I say, but when people are praising a child for their maturity, we have to look at what that means, because this is a 9-year-old. So what is it that they're praising so much, and what does maturity mean? And why might we tell a child that they are so mature beyond their years and praise them? Because in a lot of systems where abuse takes place of different sorts, we tell a child that, and really we teach them that maturity is performing, perfection, doing as they're told, like it's obedience. Maturity is not making waves. Now, sometimes we call it maturity if we don't let a child have boundaries, right? So children will grow up to be people pleasers, like children who've been, you know, in some cases, it's very different with different sorts of abuse. You know, you get some children who are in an abusive situation and they'll go completely off the rails because they can't cope. You'll get other children who are so obedient and so polite because they're so afraid of things going wrong that they try and be absolutely perfect, right? And these are the children that you often see going through a system, and it'll be like, wow, they're so well behaved, you know, they're so polite, they're so mature for their years. And I'm thinking, okay, is it maturity, or is it a fear of doing anything wrong? Is it knowing what's expected of you and not being able to be yourself and be a child? This is a 9-year-old. It's not healthy that he's showing a maturity beyond his years. And if we start looking at why they're saying he's mature, it's for reasons that are worrying, really. You can't tell me that there isn't expectation and stress on this child. Our future king. It's not even our potential future king if he so chooses, is it? He's the one that's going to be the king. He doesn't have a choice, and if he doesn't want it, he's going to let everyone down. That's essentially the contract. And I don't care what anyone says that's abusive for a child. We do not tell a child. We know this, that we don't tell a child who they are or what they're going to be beyond being kind and happy and good to other people, right? We do not tell them they have a role, that they have expectation on them from adults. We know this in normal family setups. Why can't we see this with the royals? To bring up a child knowing they've got to perform a role chosen for them by all the adults, that the adults are expecting of them from birth, is incredibly abusive. This child already knows that if he ever decides he doesn't want to be king, he's going to be letting people down. People will say, oh no, he's not going to let anyone down. Are you kidding me? They've made a situation where our future king is the headline. He's expected to do it. He's going to have to make a big statement about why, and people are going to ask, oh, why not? And what was the problem? And is he letting anyone down? And is there something wrong with him? And how could he do this to his sister? Because remember, he's in the horrible situation where if he doesn't want to do this, it falls on his little sister, who it seems, I mean, I don't know their relationships, it's not our business, but, you know, they're in a horrible situation together. I would hope that they're all close. And that's a horrible thing for him to have to carry, right? As the oldest sibling, knowing that if he steps away from that for his own sake, that falls on his sister, his little sister. Okay, and I'm not going to go through all of it because there's so much and I feel like this would be too long, but I've annotated some of it. So this is what comes after that picture. For nearly a decade, we have watched Prince George develop from an adorable newborn baby being held in Kate's arms to a self-assured young man. As second in line to the throne, he will one day take on a wealth of royal responsibilities, but for now his parents are ensuring he enjoys as normal an upbringing as possible. So even that in itself should ring alarm bells for us, right? See how they're turning George into a young man. He's 9. And the reason they have to make him into a young man now is because they know that it's inappropriate and wrong for a 9-year-old to have that level of stress and that level of responsibility. So you're going to see this a lot with the royal children, especially with George and Charlotte. They're kind of shaping Louis into the new Spare, actually, which is really sad and awful. You're going to see a lot of emphasis on how grown up he is, a little young man. I'm praising him for this because of his maturity, right? And again, what does it mean to be mature? It means doing as you're told. They say he's a self-assured young man and he will one day take on a wealth of royal responsibilities. He will. Not that there's a choice, and the sense that it's responsibilities, right? It's not fun. You have a burden. This little child, who we have to pretend is a man because otherwise we'd say what an abusive system, is going to take on responsibilities. But it's all right because his parents are making sure that for the time being, he has a normalish upbringing. So we're raising him for that, essentially. That's fine, isn't it? Is everyone insane? I'm sorry. They then talk about his schooling, right? And they talk about where he goes to school, which I don't know why that's relevant, and I don't think we should know that. They say he's been spotted kicking a ball about with his dad and Charlotte, and that he likes tennis, and basically there's a bit here that says George is a keen sportsman. And I feel uncomfortable even saying this because it's not our business. This is a child's life. A completely alien child who doesn't belong to us, who's just a little boy. But look at the narrative they're pushing on him, because he's got to be the perfect prince, right? So he's a keen sportsman. Let's not even get into the fact that he has been spotted kicking a ball about. What does that mean, he's been spotted? They've been stalking a 9-year-old, have they? They've been stalking a 9-year-old and his little sister as they play football in the garden. That's normal. He's been spotted. Imagine if that was your child. How bizarre and awful. They're basically speculating about, oh, he's said to love tennis because he did a private lesson apparently with Roger Federer. They then speak about how Roger Federer once revealed that George has a good swing and that he is a cute boy. The level of obsession and creepiness around this child is awful. It's really, really weird. Like, oh, tell us more about the child. I hear you spent some time with the child. Give us some information about the little 9-year-old. They say that, you know, he enjoyed rugby, and they're really pushing the idea that he's a sportsman because they're trying to make him into that prince character, right? The gender roles. And we saw that with, for example, Charles and Anne when Charles was younger, and I'm reading the Jonathan Dimbleby biography of Charles right now. Charles suffered a lot because out of those two, although he was born first and was the boy, Anne was more stereotypically assertive, right, and had more of those traditionally masculine qualities. I mean, I hate gender inequalities anyway, but she was seen as, you know, plucky and brave, and in comparison, Charles was quite shy. He was quite introverted. He was a nervous child, you know, he was a very sensitive child, and in order to, according to the biography, make him ready for his role, his father was very tough on him because he wanted him to be tough and manly and all that kind of thing because he had to be ready for the responsibilities put on him. So what we're already seeing here with George is this kind of, it's all right, everyone. He loves sports. He loves sports. That's what's important here. He's mature for his age, and yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. There's nothing effeminate about George. He loves his sports. Because to me, that's honestly how it reads. You know, you can't look at this kind of stuff in a vacuum. They want him to be a certain way. And some things, you know, how are they presenting this boy out of, like, PR-wise? You'll see this in the way they present the children. They have their roles. And George has to be the perfect prince. He has to be mature for his age. He has to be solemn and sensible. But also, he's got to be good at sports. Those gender roles that their parents are pushed into. And, you know, you'll see how Kate has been playing into the gender role. She's trying to make it work for her, basically. Because she's in a system which is sexist. And she's trying to use it by selling herself as, you know, the mother and children. It is not good for the kids, though, if you start playing into those gender roles. They also say that other kids better watch out because he's been learning how to tackle in football. The teachers are trying to teach him the rules, said Kate, because he is tall and he has the physique. Why is that in the article? Right? And again, it's to reassure us that he's got those masculine qualities, right? He's assertive, right? He can fight. You know, he's tall. He's a tall, masculine young man, not a child. This isn't a 9-year-old. Oh no, we don't have to feel guilty about putting this pressure on this child because he's a tall, strong man, apparently, at 9. It says he loves baking and playing the guitar, in like just very, very briefly. But like his grandfather, Charles III, one of his greatest passions is being outdoors. And this is horrible because they talk about how he likes being outdoors, and I feel uncomfortable even talking about this. I don't know this child, this poor little innocent child. And it says that William once joked he's like a caged animal if he doesn't go outside. That's chilling, because this child is a caged animal, right? This child is in a gilded cage. And look, they say that George loves baking and playing the guitar. And then they say afterward, but like his grandfather, like, it's reassurance. It's like, don't worry. Yeah, okay, he likes those things, but don't worry. He loves the outdoors because he's a boy's boy. It's horrible, but also, look, if he loves baking and he loves playing the guitar, what if George wants to become a chef or a cook, right? What if George wants to begin his own restaurant, or George wants to be in a band, right? Or to be a composer? All these things are cut off from him. And can no one see how awful it is? Oh, these are the things this child loves, but these are things he can't do. Not when the responsibility comes for him, because we're grooming him up for a role to satisfy us all, grown adults. They also talk in this about, like his father and grandfather, George is strongly eco-aware and once even asked to switch off a nature documentary because he felt so sad about extinction. Says he's been litter picking and things like that. And they talk about, apparently in a podcast, William said something about George being upset because he couldn't understand why people were littering, you know? And another sad thing about this for me is that it sounds like this child, like lots of children, is starting to think about political matters, right? Especially, I think, in the modern day. I think children are more encouraged to think about the planet, to have their own opinions. And this is where this image of him and the role conflict. Because George could be, we don't know anything about him, if he is a very sensitive person and he's getting really upset about extinction, and good, because that shows really big empathy and care for his environment. What happens if that becomes very, very important to George and he wants to get into politics or to be an activist? You know, if he wants to dedicate his life to trying to save the planet, to try and stop climate change, they are gonna, it doesn't make sense, because this is a child who obviously feels things strongly, right and wrong, and they're trying to raise him to do that, but they are grooming him for a role where he's not allowed to show his political opinions. So it's all for nothing, right? It's all for show. What are they teaching him? Yeah, you can feel those things, but remember, when you're grown up, you can't do anything about it or say anything about it. No doubt both Charles and William are incredibly proud of the heir-to-be, and rightly so. At the Queen's funeral last September, he showed an incredible maturity far beyond his years when he joined Charlotte to walk behind the coffin and bid goodbye to his beloved Gan. It's awful, right? And it absolutely upsets me, because think about it. They're proud of him. Why are they proud of him? Because he showed maturity. How do they define showing maturity? By not being a child. His Gan. So it's awful, because in this very section they're talking about his littleness, right? He's a child, he's lost somebody he loves, but they're so proud of him because, well done, you learned early, don't show the emotion, you carried yourself well in public. It doesn't matter about your personal feelings and your personal loss, it's about performing for people, and you didn't show us up, right? You didn't let us down, and we're so proud of you for that. It says next month, of course, he will appear on the world stage once again, basically for the coronation. And that's a lot of stress for a child. I don't even know how, if he even registers that yet, how different he is. And again, the picture in the corner here is a picture of George looking kind of serious, big picture. George showed a sense of maturity at the Queen's funeral. And it's just really creepy. He showed a sense of maturity at the Queen's funeral because the child didn't cry. The child didn't cry. He didn't do anything we didn't want him to. He didn't act up, you know. It didn't matter about him being a child who'd lost a family member, because if he'd cried it would have been fine, and if he'd had a tantrum it would have been fine, because grief is complicated. But we're all so proud. We're all so proud of his maturity because he didn't embarrass anyone. Right, and then they've also got, I'm skipping to another article because I'm going to do it child by child, I think. I think I'm going to do it all together. It might be long, but I'm going to do it anyway rather than split it into 3. Right, and then we've got this creepy spread. Birthday boy, Prince Gorgeous. As George celebrates his 10th birthday on July 22nd, we review how the future king is being raised for greatness by his loving family. I'm sure I don't have to explain to you how absolutely creepy that is. Prince Gorgeous. How the future king is being raised for greatness by his loving family, right? And automatically, like straight away, that's manipulative and dodgy. Raised for greatness. So we've got plans for him. He's being indoctrinated, right? That's what it is. This is how the child's being indoctrinated, and by his loving family. I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they don't love him. I don't know what's going on. But what if it is horrible in there? What if it's a situation like Harry in the future, and there's all this press about, oh, how they love him? You know, oh, he's so loved. What if he starts to get upset? What if he starts to think when he's older, how could they do this to me? How could this all be put upon me like this? I couldn't handle the pressure and I collapsed. Like, I couldn't deal with it. I imploded. They're already setting him up, right? What a loving family. I mean, I'm not saying they don't love him. It's not their fault. But when you want a child to be healthy, happy, independent, that's not how you do it. And I feel like it's such a weird disconnect, because we've got Kate talking about early years development. Not you know, why is she the ambassador for that when her child is being raised for severe trauma and mental health issues in later life? Okay, then it says this. We all like to think our children are special, but in the case of Prince George, he really is. What? I'm sorry. All children are special. We all like to think our children are special. They are. Right? Because you don't judge how special someone is based on birthright, right? And where they're born in the world, or who they're born to, or what their last name is. That's not what being special is. The only thing special about this boy here as well, and it's harmful to George as well, you might think, oh, it's really nice about him. He's learning that he's special because of his name and because of who he is in terms of the family system. He's not learning that he's special because of his own personal personality and his quirks and his skills in life. He is special and different because of the way he was born. In the case of Prince George, he really is. No, I'm sorry, all children are. All children are really special. Every single child, every single person in this world has something really important to give and to contribute. It says here, as the prince celebrates his 10th birthday this summer, royal commentators say he no longer is oblivious to the spotlight that will forever fall upon him. It's reported William and Catherine told him of his unique destiny around the time of his 7th birthday during the summer of 2020. And all I can think of is poor child. Poor child. So his parents couldn't even tell him until he was old enough, because it's such a horrible thing to drop on him. And they let him know, and they will remember, and he'll always remember the day he knew. You don't have your own life, you're a mascot. And if you don't want that, it's going to be complicated, because you're going to have to opt out. There's a lot of difficulty you're going to cause for us if you opt out of this. So, yeah, if you want to, like, you know, maintain what you have, and people like you, and the press will like you, and, you know, to be everyone's favourite child, then you're going to have to just do it. Sorry about that. Like, we're not in an age, like, it's not like the generation before. We didn't have so much awareness then. Diana was kind of married in very, very young herself. You know, it was a different understanding of mental health issues, and we saw Diana trying to make some changes in the system. It's not, I can't quite believe that we've got Kate like, oh, I'm this ambassador for children, when that's what they did to their 7-year-old. I'm not saying it's their fault, because they're in a horrible system themselves, but that's what happened to their 7-year-old. It says here, but what Kate and William are not doing is weighing him down with a sense of duty. It's not an easy job to prepare one of your children to be the future monarch. No, it's not an easy job, and it probably feels awful because it's not right. It's not morally right to do that to your child. And I feel like we know that, right? And it's not even the problem of, you know, the title or who he is. It's the whole fact that he's a mascot now. They are not doing it in terms of George might one day be the future king, which, you know, isn't great anyway. They are fully going with the he is going to be. He is part of their PR for that family. I honestly don't think it's right that these children have been, like, presented to the world in this way. I think it's weird. I think that when Harry and Meghan obviously had Archie, and people were angry, like, oh, we didn't get a good enough look at Archie. And I'm thinking, good. You know, that's a baby. That's a child. We don't own the child. You know, leave them alone. That's a child. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the pouty toddler, as we've watched George grow up alongside his siblings, Princess Charlotte, almost 8, and Prince Louis, nearly 5, we've had tantalising glimpses into his home life. What do you mean? That's a child. Who says that? We've had tantalising glimpses into the home life of this tiny child. Tantalising glimpses. They also say that William and Kate have chosen safe engagements using George's interests, such as Euro 2020 and Wimbledon, as a way of introducing him to royal working life. I'm going to say it's indoctrination and grooming. What does that sound like to you? Oh, they've slowly got him into it and desensitised him to it because they've chosen safe engagements. They've used things he likes. So we're kind of getting him used to it all before he's even 10, because we've done it through things he likes, so it's fine. That's all right. You know, he's not kicking up a huge fuss or freaking out because we're saying, oh, but it's fun though, right? You love football, don't you? You love rugby, so now you can come and perform for everybody. You're introducing him to royal working life. That might not be what he wants to do, and this is a child. Why is a child being introduced to working life? It then says George will be given the space to follow his interests in the big quote, but he won't. Okay, in private, but he's got to have this whole public persona going on. Like, he's got to give that up whenever he becomes king. It's delusional. They talk about how Catherine and William have been criticised for putting him in suits all the time, you know, and strict dress codes. And a royal commentator has said that she thinks that they're doing this so it's easier for George to differentiate between what work is and what isn't. That's a child. What do you mean differentiate between what work is and what isn't? If the comfort of the child isn't the priority, then what's going on? He's 9. What do you mean? Like, we have to teach him about work. We'll put him in an uncomfortable suit and it's all good because we have to teach him about work before he's even 10. Right, then they talk about how the entire world was watching his great-grandmother's funeral. It says George's behaviour was impeccable and his demeanour way beyond his 9 years. And again, making you into a man, because if anyone actually looked at this seriously and actually thought about how twisted this is and step back, they would say that is a 9-year-old child. Like, he shouldn't have been performing at a funeral. His behaviour was impeccable and demeanour way beyond his 9 years. When do we say that to children? Wow, you're so much older than your age. Wow, you've got an old soul, you know. Wow, well done, because you fit in with the adults, right? You're pleasing all the adults around you and that's what you want to do, right? It's so wrong. It's so wrong. They then have, like, in big letters, loving family, and about how Catherine and William are trying to give him a normal life. Trying to give him a normal life. I mean, this is not normal. This is not normal at all. Then it says William and Catherine are doing a fantastic job at raising the most well-adjusted generation that the royal family have ever known. And that's not saying much, is it, really? And I don't say that. That sounds mean. I just mean that the best job imaginable. You could try your best, but if the system is abusive and abusive to the children, then it's not protecting them and it's not good for them. Like, the bar is low. You know, they're the most well-adjusted generation. You're not going to have well-adjusted, happy children if that's what they're learning. If they're learning they have to people please and perform, and because of their birthright they're above other people, like, that's not healthy. It goes into stuff about his school here, and again, I'm not going into that because there's absolutely no reason why we should know anything about his school whatsoever. They say his parents want George to flourish without feeling the weight of royal duty. Really? That's not what's happening here, though, is it? Like, it's going to happen to him, and if he doesn't do it, he's going to have to opt out. It says William and Kate eventually enjoyed their boarding school years, and while we don't know where George will go after the school he's at, as one of the youngest in his class, developing his independence and self-esteem will be the key to his ability to navigate where he goes next. So again, I mean, I've got a book about boarding school and what that does to people, especially people who are quite wealthy, right? They often get sent off to boarding schools and what that does to their mental health. And I've had some people on this channel really share some experiences they've had there about the kind of weird neglect of that situation and how difficult that is and what that does to your brain. But also, you know, William and Kate eventually enjoyed their boarding school. So, well, oh, it's all right, you know. I'm sure George will love it in the end. He might hate it right now, but eventually he'll like it. It's not about George, is it? It's not about what he needs. It says, you know, he's one of the youngest in his class and they have to develop his independence and self-esteem. How are they developing his independence and his self-esteem when his independence is non-existent because he's a mascot? He doesn't have independence. If George, like, showed independence by refusing to do something or having a tantrum at an event, what would happen? The papers would make a big deal of it. It would be a huge issue. He wouldn't be well behaved anymore. If he decided he didn't want to be a royalist, he didn't want to be part of the royal family, that wouldn't work, would it? They're not teaching him independence. They're teaching him independence on their terms, right? You can be independent if you do what we want you to do, kid. That's what it is. And again, like, you know, they're trying to help his self-esteem. Someone's self-esteem has to be from, like, a sense of safety in who they are, right? And why they're loved and what their role is. And it can't be that a role is foisted upon you, right? He's learning that people care about him not for who he is. There's going to be a sense of detachment and derealization, and eventually the public and the private personas, they're going to become so distant to him. We've seen this happen with William and Harry and Charles. It is not a healthy system for self-esteem. They then speculate about his future, and again they say that he'll be given the space to follow his interests. Wherever his path takes him before his coronation, which is hopefully way off in the future, we'll be following this special boy who was born to be king. Creepy. That's so creepy. This special boy. We'll be following him. We'll be following this child throughout his life. Okay, also, wherever his path takes him before his coronation. So enjoy those years. Enjoy the years beforehand because you thought this was weird. Once it's your coronation, your path ends there. You're a mascot then. Okay, let's move on to Charlotte and what they're doing with Charlotte now. So, Princess Charlotte, a keen little cook. And if you look at the gender roles here, it's not slick. She's just like Kate. She loves cooking and nurturing. And what you're going to see in this is basically a load of, she's the sensible one. She looks after her brothers. If you're the girl in the family, you'll know that, right? That's what we praise girls for. I'm not saying it's a bad quality. It's a lovely quality to look out for the people around you and have that side. But it's interesting that that's kind of what they're pushing with her. So we've got that she's a keen little cook. The most important thing about Charlotte, she likes to cook. Great. Okay, so we've got she's only 7 years old, but Princess Charlotte is already becoming confident in the kitchen. Wow, I mean, okay. According to reports, she loves making cheesy pasta with her siblings. According to reports. Spying on children now. I've heard that this 7-year-old child likes making cheesy pasta. Put that in the newspaper. They say here that Kate is a keen cook, and it seems Charlotte is already developing some pretty grown-up tastes. I'm going to say that again. Charlotte is already developing some pretty grown-up tastes. This urge to push a 7-year-old into maturity. Because again, it's creepy. And people can't think this is a 7-year-old. Don't think about it like it's a 7-year-old, This is a special 7-year-old. And it's about, maturity. And she's really a little woman like her mother. That's what they're doing by linking her to Kate. She's a little woman, don't worry. She can handle it. These kids can handle it. They start talking about the food she likes. About how, she likes a bit of spicy food. Her brothers don't, but she likes spicy food. Irrelevant. Weird. They then have this picture of her, and the quote next to it is, she is confident in public. She is confident in public. Like, what does that mean? Is she, though? I mean, is that something that she's having to perform? We don't know how she feels about that. Does she get anxiety before or after? Does she have to because she thinks that's the only way to be? And also, it's this kind of like... It's kind of like the Charles and Anne thing, and I'm not saying it applies to these two at all, but the idea that we love how she's confident with the public. We love how she waves to the photographers. She gives us our shots that we want, so we like her. She's confident. The other two need to be careful because they need to be a little bit more confident. They don't want to be outdone by their little sister. And then they've got this. Charlotte doesn't just look like Kate. She's following in her footsteps too. And again, it's trying to make Charlotte into a little woman, which should worry all of us. And I don't think that we would want that for her, honestly. She's following in her mother's footsteps. It's very much with the promo of Kate, the way she's doing her PR, being wife, mother, all those gender roles. And don't worry, Charlotte's going to be just like her mum. Charlotte's going to go through all this stuff, and Charlotte's not going to have... Let's think about this seriously though, right? What does a mother need to teach her children? I'm not saying Kate isn't doing this in private. I just mean with what we know. What's something important for girls especially to learn? It's to learn your boundaries, how to say no, to be able to stand up for yourself, to have your own sense of being, to feel heard and to have a voice. That's incredibly important that little girls and have a voice and they learn that it's okay to express it. That is the opposite of what her mother is allowed to do in her role. That is not a good thing. This is 2023, that's not good. And then they add this weird thing. So they talk about how Charlotte is, she likes gymnastics and dancing and things like that. They link her to Diana with the dancing, very sweet. There's nothing wrong with that. It's still weird that we should know about it. It's not our business. I mean, imagine your child, the paper was just like, anyway, we hear about this. We hear that the child likes this now. We hear this is the child's favourite food. I'll be like, I hear that there's going to be a restraining order and you're all going to jail. But they talk about how she's really into her gymnastics. That she's doing cartwheels, headstands and everything because we like girls to be perky, right? Happy Charlotte, confident Charlotte, smiling Charlotte in her role. We love that for girls. She's even able to do the splits, a skill she's inherited from her mum, who revealed she could perform the tricky move when she was younger. What's that doing here? I don't understand what that's doing here. Why she can do the splits, oh, Kate used to be able to do the splits. Like, explain to me what relevance that has. What's that doing here? Okay, and then in the other article, we have the next Charlotte piece. Sorry, this is so long. Charlotte the Great. And in the corner it says girl power. Such girl power. Love it, you know, raising a child to smile and wave at people that are invading their privacy and their parents' privacy, and to just put up with it, you know, and be pleasing to them and not say no and not choose things for yourself and not be independent. Right, and they bring Harry into this because they say why this spare's future will be very different from that of her uncle Harry. Will Princess Charlotte despair at being the spare like her controversial uncle? That's what worries Prince Harry, reportedly. I just want to say, first of all, it's a very valid worry to have, knowing the system they've been raised in. But also I want to say that this is a complete fake out, and it's a ridiculous argument, because it's not going to be Charlotte. We can already see this because of the gender differences. If we look at what they're doing to Louis in the next articles, I think it's pretty clear that the roles are, they're putting George in the William role. I think Charlotte is meant to be the Anne role, you know, that sort of nurturing mini Kate, sensible one, smiling, pleasing, reliable. Don't worry, we can always rely on the girl in the family, right, to do that extra labour and do that extra stuff. Of course, she's there to like get her brothers in check and, you know, be the apple of her dad's eye, all that kind of thing, and be just like her mum. And Louis is actually the one they're making the spare, I believe. From what we've seen in the coverage, the closest comparison we have is George and Louis with William and Harry. So it's a fake out that they're doing this, because that's not even, Harry didn't say, oh, it's going to be Charlotte. Obviously the gender roles mean it isn't Charlotte. A controversial uncle, even that is really abusive, because it's basically saying, this whole article is like, Charlotte's going to have a great time. Charlotte can handle it. She's not like her controversial uncle. But what that means is that if she gets older and she feels like Harry, and she does want to say that, it's going to be like, oh, you're just like him, are you? We thought you were better. It's really manipulative. It's like, we thought you were better than that, really. But you're just like him. I'm not sure why worrying about the mental health of these children, his own niece and nephews, is considered to be such a bad thing from Harry. It really has got to that point where empathy for your own family members has become a bad thing. He says, you know, they mention what Harry says about that William and he have talked about it once or twice, and he has made it very clear that his kids are not his responsibility. But Harry says he still feels a responsibility, knowing that out of those 3 children, at least one of them will end up like me, the spare, and that hurts. That worries me. And it's like, oh, he's interfering. He's the only one switched on enough to think, do you know what? What we kind of went through, William and I, wasn't great, and I kind of don't want that for the next generation. You know, let's try and make it nicer for them. They say, but is Harry right to be concerned? Will Charlotte, who thanks to changes brought about by the Succession to the Crown Act in 2013, is third in line to the throne after her brother George, really suffer as Harry has? Or will she be more resilient like her great-aunt Princess Anne? And there's the manipulation on a child, on a little girl. Will she end up like her Uncle Harry? It's a threat to the child. It's, you know, will she make a fuss like Harry did? Or will she be loved and respected and admired like Anne, who simply got on with it? Because that's what we love out of a child, right? A little girl child. We need them to be obedient and know not to speak back and to do their job and not complain, because that's what we want for her. She's more resilient than Harry. You know, it's so manipulative. It's not just attacking Harry, it's the future of the child. They say royal experts believe it's more likely to be the latter, thanks to her stable and loving upbringing. Royal experts are kind of an arm of the monarchy, aren't they? They're not exactly going to say, well, it's very possible she might have lasting trauma and harm and mental health issues that go on until later life. They're not going to say that, are they? You want to ask child psychologists, right? You want to ask people who care about dysfunction, family dynamics. Obviously the royal experts aren't going to say, you know what, actually, yeah, the system's kind of abusive to those kids, like maybe we should just get rid of it. They say that she turns 8 in May, and she has shown her character from an early age. At 3, she famously told photographers they weren't invited to her brother Louis's christening party, and in 2019 she was snapped poking her tongue out at onlookers at the King's Cup regatta on the Isle of Wight. So what are you getting from that? I kind of feel like that's a child that doesn't like the photographers. Do you remember how when William was little, when he was still a little vulnerable child, and he used to say he didn't like the photographers. He was scared of the photographers. And the same thing's happening to her. And these papers aren't thinking, oh, that child has hostility towards the press and maybe fear. They're like, oh, she's got character, not we're stalking the child. It says Charlotte also clearly enjoys a close relationship with her big brother, who celebrates his 10th birthday in July, and cheeky younger brother, who hits his 5th birthday milestone at the end of April. And there it is. There's the heir and spare dynamic. It's skipping Charlotte. Charlotte's gender role means that she is just pacifier, sweet, hardworking Charlotte, just like Kate. We've got the heir and the spare, and Louis is the spare, right? Big brother George, serious, solemn, and mature, and then we've got cheeky Louis, mischievous Louis, rebel Louis. Where have we seen that go before, and how do you think the tabloids will use that as they grow up? It says a quote here, she seems to be a fun-loving, confident, and happy child. Yeah, in the public appearances she's forced to do, sure, you know, oh, she's smiling, oh, I'm glad. It's like when you've got these, like, parents, pushy parents who push their kids into show business, and they're like, look, my child's smiling on the stage, you know, they're so happy to be there. And it's like, no, they've been taught that when you go on the stage and perform, you smile, you look happy, because that's part of it. Last September, an earnest Charlotte was filmed telling George you need to bow as the coffin was loaded into the hearse. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's cute in terms of these are children going through something very awful together, but also you need to bow. This is a child at a funeral. So her role is the stabilizer role in the family, essentially. So goodness knows what happens if Charlotte has rebellious years, because we know that there's so much more sexism towards women, obviously. So much in sexism, you know, it's a sexist system. If she ever went off the rails, it's going to be brutal for her, especially from this role. They're going to present her as like fallen, right? The late Queen previously revealed that Charlotte bosses her brothers around, and Mum Catherine confirmed it, but added they were great friends. And while Harry's memoir Spare made all too plain the pressure of growing up in the royal fishbowl, Charlotte at least seems to be handling it with all the sensibilities employed by the Princess Royal. She shouldn't have to. Sure, Harry talked about how abusive the whole thing is, but you know what? Charlotte's handling it. She shouldn't have to handle it. You know, it's all right, it's a horrible system, but it doesn't seem to have done any horrific lasting damage yet. You know, maybe in some years' time we'll find out in the future. But for now, you know, she's smiling in public appearances, so it must be fine. And there's a really, really big picture of her. Like, I just still feel uncomfortable, like a random big picture of a child for no reason. Like, for no reason, just there she is, our Charlotte the Great. And they also say that she's our future superstar, so they're kind of making her into the Anne role. But don't misunderstand, her role's going to be to support her brothers, and she's going to be a superstar because she's resilient. Why are they saying she's like Anne? Because she's happy to work hard in the background for the sake of her brothers. That's what we reward girls for, and that's why she's going to be a superstar. And they talk about how Anne spoke, and her kind of worldview is about serving, right? Because of what she watched her parents do. They're now saying they want Charlotte to emulate Anne's attitude. If Charlotte can emulate Anne's attitude, she will do well, say royal watchers. Royal watchers, stalkers. Her ability to cope in the future is down to the parenting of the Prince and Princess of Wales, who will help their children face the inevitable challenges of royal life. So they say she'll do well if she emulates Anne's attitude. And so far, you know, will she have the ability to cope? What if she can't? What if she can't cope? Children can't deal with this kind of thing. She'll do well to be just like her aunt, because her aunt doesn't cause a fuss. Her aunt works hard all the time. We don't hear anything bad from her. And then they start getting into psychology stuff, and it drives me insane. It says, providing a loving home where children can express their feelings helps to build a strong inner psychological world where emotions are regulated, explains chartered psychologist Dr. Meg Arrell. No one gets through life unscathed, so all we can do is tip the scales in our children's favour. We can't protect kids from life, rather we can give them the tools to cope effectively with the pressures and strains of the future, royal or otherwise. And I do not believe any psychologist would say that what's going on with these children is fine or normal, and it's quite shocking. Like, it shouldn't be that they're up against this horrible thing and their parents are trying to make them ready. Like, it's all right because they're teaching them at home exactly how to hide their feelings and how to deal with the stress. Those things shouldn't be happening in the first place. It says here, Harry's childhood was, of course, marked by the traumatic loss of his mother when he was 12. And he says, a distant relationship with his father, but Charlotte's upbringing appears to be the opposite. There is no doubt Charlotte's future will differ from Harry's. Well, yeah, obviously, I mean, they even, you know, even in a situation where people have the same parents, you don't have the same upbringing, you know. People have different family roles. The gender differences will be very different in the way that Charlotte is treated. No one's saying she's going to have the exact same issues as Harry. I mean, Harry and William, their roles were different and they've got totally different issues. I feel like no one's saying that she's going to have the same issues as Harry, but people react differently to trauma in various ways. And it doesn't make any difference if, oh, okay, it's a house where mental health is talked about. Because what if the child says, you know what, I'm actually scared of the photographers and I don't want them to follow me everywhere? It's not helping, is it, to say, well, we'll give you the tools so that you know, you can do some affirmations in your head, you know, about it. It's okay, it's fine. No, you need to get rid of that thing for the child, the abuse of the child. That needs to go. It's, oh, you know, we'll build these strong psychological shields for them. They shouldn't need strong psychological shields. The world is horrible enough for children to navigate without any of this stuff. Children shouldn't be being taught to deal with these things. They should be seeing it modelled, that when things are unjust and awful, the adults around them protect them, and that they fight against those things and that they don't play into them. That's really important for children to learn. It says, our future superstar, she might be no nonsense like her great aunt Anne, but Charlotte is still as cute as a button and steals the show wherever she goes. No nonsense. So she's a cute child. She's just like her mum, but she's also just like Anne. She's also just like Diana. She's not her own person. She's no nonsense. Why do they say she's no nonsense? Because she's a sister who sometimes tells her brothers to behave. She's no nonsense, just like Anne. And they just have like a load of random pictures of her, like one with her where she's sticking her tongue out at people, which I think photographers, which might just be a normal thing, but it might be because these people are following her and she's a child and she doesn't like it. It says she appears to have a close bond with George, and pictures of them together. And I hope that the children do have a close bond, because I think that Harry and William would have had a better time if they'd been closer and bonded together. In systems like this, siblings rarely do remain close because the system is competitive and they have such different roles. But, you know, I hope and pray that these three are, and the same with Archie and Lily. I think Archie and Lily have much more of a shot because they're out of the role a bit more. But I just hope that these children are close and that they can support each other, so that when the three of them want to get out, if they do, that they've got each other to lean on, because it's going to be very, very difficult. It is kind of cult-like, isn't it? It's going to be tough on them. The children are going to need each other a lot. Okay, and then last of all, we're going to do Louis. And Louis is being made ready to be the new Harry and the new Spare. It's, you know, they're saying, oh no, Charlotte is... They're not doing it to Charlotte yet. They're doing it to Louis at the moment. So Prince Louis, cute and cheeky. And think about, this is what they did with Harry, right? Harry was the cheeky one. They always kind of played it as if William was studious and good and serious and sensitive, and Harry was this outgoing sort of bundle of energy kind of person. With his sunny personality and spirited smile, Louis is a little live wire. So they're already setting him up for the Joker role, right? This was the role Harry played. So this is somebody who, as a child, it's, oh, okay, he's more emotional than the others openly, maybe just because he's younger, but he's quite reactive. We all saw the kind of situation where he kind of made his mum shut up. I think he put a hand on her face, which is quite worrying, because I don't think a child would usually do that. I'm not saying anything against the child, of course. I don't know, the stress that child is under is going to be unimaginable, and it's going to be hard to understand. I don't know if he's seen that being done before. It's an odd thing for a child to do, I think. But, you know, people kind of saying about him having a tantrum as if it's a really bad thing. I would actually say that it's quite normal in terms of the level of stress he's under, and he is just a child. You know, he really is just a child, and sometimes children do have tantrums. I don't doubt that he's under a lot of stress, and it would be interesting to, it's not my business, but I would hope there are people around him who can help him with that stuff. It does seem that he's the most loose cannon, right? He's the most risky in a public place. Now, as a little child, they're selling this because they're like, oh, he's a live wire, he's a cheeky chappy. But what happens when he gets a little bit older? He's going to be compared to George, because the same with William and Harry, it's going to make George look better. George is so serious and solemn, and aren't we happy that he's going to be the heir because we don't want democracy where we get to choose? You know, sure, Louis might be fun, but they're going to have to come up with reasons why he'd be unsuitable, right? It's just, like, that's just what's going to happen. You know, the sunny personality and spirited smile, what they're actually talking about is a child that's very openly, emotionally demonstrative, right? This is potentially a child that's going to find it much more difficult to hide his feelings than others. And it might be, you know, we don't know anything about the children. It might be that he's neurodivergent, he might have ADHD or something like that. You know, it could be nothing. It could just be his natural personality. But that's already been noted by the press, and they're already trying to spin it. But I imagine that's going to be difficult going forward, because when your whole role is performing a certain way, I think that's going to be pretty tough on that child, because he's a very open child, it seems. They say about how he stole the show during the Trooping of the Colour. He famously planted his hands firmly over his ears during the fly past on the Buckingham Palace balcony. I don't really think that's what people were talking about. I think they were talking about the fact that he was kind of angry with his mum. He was having a sort of tantrum, and I don't mean that in a bad way, like, oh no, the child had a tantrum. Like, he's a child, children will have tantrums, especially when they're being made to perform in public and being made to sit and being photographed. You know, they're just children. I think people were more concerned about the way he was reacting towards Kate, and, you know, it's not my area of expertise. I don't know any of that stuff, but I know that the papers had to kind of spin it in a certain way, and he's not going to be a little child forever. So I worry about how they're going to present Louis in the future. They're saying, oh, he's had us in stitches, he's made us all laugh, because that's his job, right? He's the Joker, he's the backup act. That was kind of what they did with Harry. And they're saying whether he's pulling funny faces at his mum, poking his tongue out, giggling gleefully, or jumping up and down in the royal box, Louis is rapidly winning our hearts. They say he's clearly close to King Charles because he wandered over to his grandfather, who happily perched him on his knee and rocked him up and down. And again, like, just a weird thing about the way we worship the royal family, that's quite normal, right? In a family situation, it's like we worship it. Like, oh wow, what amazing people, that little child went and sat on Charles's knee, and it's like, yeah, that's his granddad. That's his granddad. I often waddled over and sat with my granddad when I was a kid. Like, yeah, they're human beings. They're saying that third-born children often have to fight to keep up with their siblings, but it seems Louis is giving everyone a run for their money. And he's very quick running around, and he's on his little scooter as well. And she said she can't keep up with him. So it'll be interesting to see where they take this in a few years, because I worry about this child, because he will be being taught that his role is not to emote and not to be over the top. And this is a child who shows their emotions. How are they going to get him to stop doing that? You know, without removing the stressor for him, which they can't because he's born into the stress. They say the little prince certainly loves being in the fresh air. He likes to release his pent-up energy after a day at school. Louis comes home and says, I need to get my energy out, she laughed. So again, I mean, I'm not diagnosing anything, possibly ADHD. I mean, I think potentially, I don't know, it's not my business, but, you know, there's nothing wrong with it if there is. But, you know, we're already talking about a child with a lot of pent-up energy being forced into a role where they have to try and rein that in. If the child is naturally very lively, this is not a healthy situation, is it? Like his older brother George, Louis is starting to enjoy rugby, and Kate fears he'll be only too keen to get in on the action. They're all enjoying it. Louis is kamikaze, said Kate. We're worrying about when he gets older, he'll be in the middle of everything. Who does that sound like? Sounds like young Harry. This is exactly how they used to do young Harry, right? And we know that in his book, Harry was quite, I mean, Dr. Gabor Mate suggests maybe he had ADHD, but also there's a lot of trauma and stress in his life. And something he used to do is he used to get really physically involved to make himself feel something. You know, in some ways it's a form of self-harm. It was like throwing himself into things on an impulse to feel something. And they're saying they're worrying about this when he's older because he'll get in the middle of everything. And that's how they sold Harry. That's what they're now saying about Louis. They're worrying about when he gets older. About his role, maybe, because he's not going to be a little child forever. He is going to grow out of that age where they can, you know, they're calling him like, you know, oh, he's so cute, the cheeky monkey. What happens to that child later? And we see this in, you know, not even in a royal situation. Children who are like that, who have things like ADHD, I'm not saying he does, but people like that, they get taught to mask, right? And they get taught to make themselves smaller and to perform a certain way. And they've got some really cute pictures of him on here, like some cute pictures of little Louis. Now they've also got, I'm just going to say, they've got like a double page spread for his birthday. And there's not a lot of information here because he's the youngest and there's not so much. There's not really anything exciting here, apart from they say spirited. And I think that's interesting. They put spirited in quotation marks and they talk about him being very passionate child, like needing to get his energy out. They're already sowing the seeds for that. He's the spirited one. Watch him. George is the serious, solemn one that we can rely on. He's very mature. They're almost implying that this child is immature. And it's like, well, no, like, he's a child. He's acting like a child. Yeah, so that's kind of what I wanted to go through based on these most recent articles I'd seen on the children. And I hope it's not disrespectful to the children to even be putting this on here. I wasn't sure whether to do it or not, but I thought because it's in the papers, not mentioning their schools or anything like that. But I think the system is really abusive, and I think going forward we are going to see some fallout with these kids. And all I just hope and pray is that they have got support. I hope there's people outside of the system and outside of the family that they can go to, that if they don't want this, that they know that, you know, they won't be letting, well, they kind of will be letting people down in terms of royalists and things, but it's about what they want. And what they want needs to come first, and what's good for them needs to come first. And I just really hope there's a way out so they can make those choices for themselves and that they come out of this kind of unscathed. I really, really hope it's not a situation where we have a lot of trauma going on like we know happened with Harry and William and Charles. I really hope that these little kids who are growing up in the spotlight are okay and are going to be okay, honestly. And it makes me thankful that Archie and Lily are so much more private, you know, so that when they're older they can make their own choices about how much they are seen and what they want to do, etc. So I really pray for those kids, and I truly, truly mean that. I really hope they're okay, because they're totally innocent in this. And they are some of the biggest, I'd say they are the biggest victims of the system right now. And people just aren't thinking about it or talking about it, which is just bizarre to me. But yeah, thank you for watching. It's been really long, and let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I wish you really well. Okay, love you. Bye.